Hey friends, and welcome to the Happy Hour with Jamie Ivey podcast. I'm your host, Jamie, and I'm so glad you're here. Each week on this show, I invite a girlfriend to join me and we chat about the big things in life, the little things in life, and everything in between.
Today's show is sponsored by Nations Photo Lab. Refresh your wall decor with Nations Photo Lab. Choose from classic photo prints, museum-quality canvas prints, breathtakingly vibrant metal prints, rustic wood print wraps, and so much more. Ordering online is easy. You can turn your Instagrams into instant memories that will last a lifetime. Make every moment matter and try Nations Photo Lab today. Head to nationsphotolab.com and use the code HAPPYHOUR for 15% off your order. Welcome to the Happy Hour today, you guys. It is our last Wednesday in the month of May. If you are like me, it is our last Wednesday of school year. My kids get out this Friday. We are so excited for the summer. Summers for us are super fun. We pack them sometimes too full, but with so much fun stuff. My kids have exciting things going on this summer. Aaron and I have exciting things this summer. Plus, we are going to actually schedule in some rest time. So happy last Wednesday of May. Today, my guest is Alia Joy. We're closing out May with Alia, which is a perfect conversation because May has been Mental Health Awareness Month. This conversation that I had with Alia a couple of weeks ago was eye-opening for me in the fact that I haven't had direct life experience with bipolar illness or suicidal thoughts. And I can honestly say I'm so thankful to have met Alia Joy and to have her sit down with me in my studio because she shares so much wisdom with us. For those of us who may not understand this because it's never directly affected us, we have Alia today to talk with us about it, and I want you to lean in and listen close. Today, we talk about a lot of different things. One of the things we talk about is how Alia's parents were missionaries to Nepal. Alia came down with leukemia at the age of 5, which forced her family to leave the mission field and come home to Hawaii, and it was extremely difficult to her family due to this Western church view of faith versus a global church view of faith. You've got to hear her tell the story. She had some more childhood trauma in her life. She was molested as a child. And the pain and losses that she experienced in following God as a child actually led to years of bitterness. But in the darkest of times, she saw God meeting her in her desperation. She says, "When I am weak, he is strong. Is weakness my spiritual gifting?" You're going to really, really enjoy this conversation. I read a lot of her book, and I highly recommend it for you guys to check that out as well. We'll talk about it in the conversation. Before we get to the interview, I want to remind you guys how important it is for the Happy Hour to get ratings and reviews over on iTunes. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal to you guys, but let me tell you, when you give us, we'll take a 5-star rating, okay? When you give us a 5-star rating, it helps other people see our show. And we want a lot of people listening to the Happy Hour because we have amazing guests on here. We want people to hear about mental health awareness. We want people to be aware of the conversations that we're having at the Happy Hour. So we would love it if you would take the time sometime in the next week to rate and review the show. We'd also love it if you would share it. I see you guys tagging me on Instagram all the time when you share the show, and it makes my heart so happy. I love sharing shows that I'm listening to on Instagram. So if you do share, we'd love to see it. Tag us on Instagram so we can see it. But will you please rate and review the show on iTunes this week? We would be so thankful. Okay, guys, here is my conversation with Alia. Hey, Alia, welcome to the Happy Hour.
Hey, good to be here.
So thankful that you're here. Before we jump into talking about something super fun and exciting, like God glorifying through our weakness.
Super fun.
Super fun. Introduce yourself and tell everyone where you live, your family, things like that.
Okay. I live in Central Oregon with my husband, Josh, and my 3 children. I have a 18-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 10-year-old. They both the 2 younger ones both just had birthdays in March. So
you had
I'm getting used to doing the rounding up to the next. And then my little tiny Asian mother lives with us. So it's a full house. And then my husband's a painter, and we live on an acre. We have chickens and a bunny and a dog that's... Well, he's a border collie Australian shepherd, so he's a fun dog to have around, but he's a lot of work.
That's so great.
Yeah.
You just released the book in April, and it's called Glorious Weakness. And I read a lot of this book over the past week, and I first want to tell you, thank you for writing this.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I talk a lot about being vulnerable with our stories and being authentic.
Right.
And when I read that and see that, there's something really beautiful to it. And so you did that in this work. And so I also know that sometimes that's really hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's difficult because you have to go back and you have to sit in emotions that you might not even feel anymore.
Right.
You have to write about. So first of all, thank you for writing this.
You're welcome. And thanks.
This sucked me in from the very beginning. You said this book isn't for everyone. I was like, oh, that's bold. You said my publisher's marketing team might not want me to tell you that. Book sales being what they are these days, especially for a relatively obscure first-time author who is known primarily for writing her feelings on the internet. But there you have it. And then you talk, and I'm going to flip all the way back to chapter 9. And you said, a few years ago, I spoke. No, I preached. Good for you, girl. And the message was simple. When I am weak, he is strong. I said, weakness is a holy invitation to allow grace to do its work. And I asked, what if weakness was a spiritual gift? But what I was really wondering was, is it mine? Was my spiritual gift weakness? And could that even be a thing?
I think it's a thing.
Let's go there. I mean, because you said glorious weakness, I want to go all the way back. I want you to talk about you had a hard childhood, and let's talk about how God has actually used things in your life and shown you weakness, and you've seen his glory through it. So talk with me first. Let's go back and talk about childhood. What did that look like for you?
So I was born to missionary parents. They became Christians in the 70s during the whole Jesus movement, and there was an idealism and a zeal that was there, not necessarily maturity in some areas. And they had that, this sort of theology that, the clock is ticking and the rapture, everything's coming to an end and this is the end time, all of that. And so they were going to go make disciples. That was their thing. And they believed, my mom had become a Christian and had read all of the missionary biographies and just was an incredibly idealistic person. And so they both, they joined Youth with a Mission. We ended up moving. I actually celebrated my first birthday in Holland.
Is that YWAM?
Mm-hmm, okay. YWAM, yeah. So they were there. They did that. We were in Europe, all over Europe for a while. And then we moved to Nepal. This is the early 80s. And so we were there for a while in community. And then I got diagnosed with leukemia. And so we ended up going back to Holland for treatment. And
you're how old at this point?
I'm 5.
Okay.
Yeah. And then from there we went back to Hawaii, which is where I'm originally from. And coming back, re-entry was, I think, the hardest part. When we went to Nepal, I think they thought they were going to live their whole lives there. That this was what God had called them to. This was the thing. And they just had this sort of monumental faith. We went there. They've got 2 kids, and I think they had $75 a month pledge support, and they were just like, God's going to provide. So they had that just deep, deep trust in God. But when we came back to the States and we were in a churches, in the North American church, which looks at trusting God like that as just complete foolishness, right? It's just ridiculous. Why would you take 2 kids to Nepal? And look, she got sick, prove that God isn't faithful if you aren't in America and making all the choices and doing all the things. And so it was sort of catastrophic to their faith. I think there was just a lot of crisis we were thrown in, a lot of trauma. I don't think they talked about post-traumatic stress as much back then, but they were definitely experiencing it. We just had a lot of things go, horribly sideways. And they started to get bitter. And then for me, my childhood, a lot of it was I was molested when we were in Nepal, and I never told anybody.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And so it was just this thing that started developing these lies in my head about who I was to God and what that meant and how could he let this thing happen if he's good, and how could, he talk about blessing the faithful if my parents are faithful, but we don't look blessed. There's not hashtag blessed in this world, right? So I'm looking around, I'm looking at them struggling financially, we're struggling with health, we're struggling with just so many things. And probably by high school for sure, I had just lost all faith that God could be good. I just could not reconcile. You just look around, you watch the news, you're like, This is impossible. How could a good God be good?
What about your parents' faith at that time?
I think they were very bitter. They were they weren't angry with God in the way that some might be, leaving the faith. But they had this very sort of nebulous idea of what the church was. And it was kind of solidarity with missionaries and with the global church, but not actually a local church, because the local churches had the ability to hurt us because they were filled with people that could hurt us, and they were exhausted. And so, by the time I was in middle school, they weren't going to church anymore. We weren't in fellowship with anybody. And they were very, very bitter about Christian culture and what they saw here, and a lot of hypocritical things, which I think a lot of people are struggling with now. I mean, a lot of people that I know that are my age are struggling with those same things, going to the church and seeing, hey, these things don't line up, what we say we believe and how we're acting out. So yeah, that affected me pretty deeply. And it affected my relationship with God, because we had been through so many hard things. And I thought, it just doesn't make sense, to me.
So how did your relationship come back to the Lord? Or how did you ever, if you never had trusted that before, how did you begin to trust that he could still be good in the midst of some really crappy circumstances?
Yeah. So I have bipolar disorder, but I did not know at the time. I wasn't even diagnosed until my early 30s. And so there's a lot of mental illness throughout my family and things like that we didn't have language for it. We didn't talk about it. And so, I don't think we even knew, some of the terminology to surround what was happening.
Which y'all weren't mentally alone. Wouldn't you say that would be kind of a cultural norm?
Right.
Yeah.
And so we had moved back to Hawaii in my teen years. I was in the middle of my junior year, and I was very angry inside, very, very angry and kind of destructive. But on the outside, I was the perfect daughter. I got really good grades. I ran, track. I did drama. I mean, all this stuff. And I had good friends that got good grades. And my brother I have a brother that's 3 years older. He was the one that was a mess. He was the one that punched holes in the walls and got expelled and tried to, hang himself on the back porch when I was in middle school. These were the things that they were dealing with him. So he was the one that got the most attention. And I was the one that, they just assumed Alia's going to be fine. She's capable. She's strong. They
didn't need to worry about you because on the outward, you're doing it all.
On the outward, I'm strong. I'm capable. I'm, able to do the things. And so that was my identity. But on the flip side, I was doing all kinds of things that were really bad. A lot out of anger and out of rebellion, and, a lot because sometimes that's just fun too, in high school. And so we moved. My dad got a ministry job offer. We moved back to Hawaii. So I was already angry at God, and now God was making my family move back for this ministry. And I just wanted nothing I was so angry. And I had a boyfriend and friend. I mean, it's my middle of my junior year. And we get to Hawaii, and we fly to the Big Island, which is where the ministry is supposed to be. And they had this they're supposed to have a house and a car and all this stuff for us. So we get there, and my dad goes, we're still staying in the hotel. And my dad goes to check out the house, and I wish I still had the video of it, but there's a concrete slab, everything had been gutted. There was rainwater. There were squatters had come in over the years. This is the house we're supposed to live in. No plumbing. Okay. I mean, everything was just ripped out. The windows are all broken, mold everywhere. I mean, it was like
disaster.
Mm-hmm. And we lived in Nepal in the early 80s in a dung hut. So we're not talking about we're not super high maintenance, but this was unlivable. Standing water with mosquito. I mean, so my dad obviously contacts the ministry and is like, this isn't going to work for my family. And so anyway, through a bunch of stuff, they ended up finding a rental, this boxy little rental up in the hills. And we paid half of the rent and they paid the other half. And they had provided this car that was this old Mustang that looked like a Pinto, and the exhaust fume would come in. So you would have to drive around to with the window rolled down and a towel that you could open so we wouldn't all asphyxiate in the car. And when we moved there, we were in Pahoa, which is the rainy side of the island, and it rained for 42 days straight. It was either drizzling or it was pouring. It was their monsoon season. And I was just as angry as anybody. I mean, I was so enraged with God because this is what he's called us to. Mm-hmm. And this is what he provides for us. And if this is what he provides, I don't want anything to do with him. And my parents, especially my dad, would always say, God has a call on your life. And, he always believed this. And I was like, F you. God is nothing. Mm-hmm. He will never have a part of me.
Yeah.
And I want nothing to do with him. And so after moving there and being in those situations, before we'd moved, I had gotten in an accident driving my friend's car. I didn't have a license. There was a whole court thing. So I couldn't drive when we moved to Hawaii. So I had no vehicle, no license, no ability to go anywhere on my own, no escape. We were up in the hills.
And it's raining for 42
days. So it was basically like a makeshift rehab. All of a sudden, I'm in this place where I can't numb everything. Because in Albuquerque, I would, be with my friends and I could numb it with attention or with boys or with drugs there was always something that I could use. And all of a sudden I'm in isolation. I'm, in this house and I have to deal with all of this pain and it's too much. And so I remember one night it was pouring rain and I thought, I remember just coming into my head. I'm like, I'm just done. And the thing that had held me off the longest was, when my brother had attempted death by suicide in my middle school years, he lived, and I remember the capillaries had broken in his eyes, and his eyes were, bloody, and the scar on his neck, it turned purple and brown and yellow. And I remember my mom, the look on her face when she would look at him and see that, it was so traumatic, and we were trying to put all the pieces back together afterwards. And I remember thinking, I would never do that to my mom. Like, as angry as I was and as, bitter as I was like, I just can't do that to her. And so that had been had staved off a lot of the things. Like, I can't do that. I knew that the reality of that. But I was in so much pain and I thought, I don't know what else to do. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking through our medicine cabinets and trying to think what will for sure do the trick. We just didn't have anything in our house. And so I've got this Bic disposable razor. I'm like, can this even do the thing? Will this even work? And I'm standing in our bathroom on this cracked linoleum, and I'm yelling at the ceiling, I never asked to be born. I don't want any, I want any of this. Why am I even here? Because now I'm thinking, I never asked to be born. I never asked for any of this, but if I kill myself, I'm probably going to hell. In my head, because of what I'd been raised with, I thought, and now you're going to punish me for, living in this world that stinks and trying to escape from it because I'm in pain. And, so all of this stuff's going through my head and I'm thinking I'm just done. And then I was physically knocked to the ground, slammed to the ground and filled with just peace. I still to this day can't really describe it.
Well, I love in your book, you're like, I'm not this weird Christian,
right.
But here's what happened, guys.
Right. And even afterwards, I was like, it was probably my, autonomic nervous system, maybe I had a mini stroke. I was at such a high level of stress, probably my adrenal system kicked in and my legs collapsed. And I was trying to explain away what I felt was the presence of God saying, I want a piece of you. That's what it felt like he was interrupting my life. And I didn't really want to relent to that. At the same time, I'd never felt anything like that peace. And so then became the rest. I wouldn't say, oh, and then I got saved right then. It took a long time. I'm pretty stubborn. And so it took a long time. I would read my Bible in secret behind my locked door because I didn't want my dad to say I told you so.
Right.
And I started wrestling with God and wrestling with scripture. And I don't have a, exact date that this is when I accepted.
Yeah.
Because I did that my whole youth. Mm-hmm. I accepted him every single time there was an altar call.
Just in case.
Just in case. And
you got
it didn't seem like it took,
yeah.
right? I'm like, it didn't really take.
Yeah.
Or sometimes I think maybe it took, but then it didn't, And so I had done that for years and years and years. Always.
Which is so fear-based.
Giving my life to get, right. And I remember doing that, getting in the car with somebody that was drunk and being like, Lord, as I'm driving, right, as I were driving, just in case, because, and so I don't have an exact date that I became a Christian, but through the wrestling, God started to work in me. And I think I started in Job, which, I had read it before, and through the filter of God is just a jerk, right? Like, let's mess with this guy, oh yeah, you can mess with him, fine, whatever. And for some reason reading it then, the Holy Spirit was at work and I just saw something different.
Wow.
And I just saw how God comes for us, like he comes for us when we're desperate, and I didn't know how profound that would be for my life, for the next 30 years, but that really has been my story. God comes for me when I'm desperate and meets me in that place where I'm at the end of myself and meets me in a profound and deep way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned mental illness and bipolar. You state in your book that something like one in four will lose or battle to suicide. And, mental illness is a topic that we should be talking about more.
Right.
I admit my ignorance on the subject, but I'm so here for the conversation and to learn.
Yeah.
I was at a conference last weekend and a woman spoke, and she said something that has altered my thought life about even this statistics that you just told about suicide. Her husband lost his life to suicide a year ago, and she said no one chooses suicide. She said everyone says it's like the most selfish thing you could do.
Yeah.
Well, no one chooses it, and so she says he lost his life by suicide.
Right.
And that terminology was so new for me sitting in that room, and I thought, oh, I'll never say it the other way again.
Yeah.
But I had never understood that.
Yeah.
Because I've never been personally affected by suicide or in my close circles.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying never, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you talk about this, when you're coming at the table, and because I know you write a lot about this subject, and I'm so honored and proud that you're sitting here talking with me about it. What do you see from other Christians? Is this like a scary conversation, a hard conversation? Do we want to dip our toe in it? Or how does that feel when you see the church having conversations about mental illness?
I think there are degrees. So I think we're getting a little bit more comfortable with depression. When I first started writing, when I had already been diagnosed with bipolar, when I first started writing about mental illness, I used the term depression and only depression, postpartum depression and depression, because bipolar was big and scary, and I hadn't even fully accepted it myself. And to talk about it out in the world, I thought people are going to think, I'm crazy, because in my mind, that was sort of the mental image that I had of this is what it's going to look like.
And I think society, in a little bit, to bend you a little bit, society has painted that picture a little bit.
Well, and it was exactly, I had watched a Law and Order SVU episode years ago. And the woman in it had bipolar disorder, and she was just, out of control and dangerous. And I remember thinking, well, I'm dangerous to myself. Yes, maybe. But to other people, and we're more likely to hurt ourselves than anybody else. So there was those kinds of things that I thought, I don't want it to be associated with that. And so, but depression was something that I think people were starting to understand. It became a little bit more mainstream in that people can relate to sadness. Now, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about it, and how we treat it and how we deal with it in the church. So I'm not saying we're there, but it felt a little more comfortable to talk about depression and name it as that than to name it as bipolar disorder. And then the next level to talk about suicidal ideation. Because when you say, so, a lot of times in our testimonies, right, I would say I was this in my childhood, and then I had this come to God moment, and I was suicidal, and then he met me, and then that would be like the happy ending that ends. But I still struggle with suicidal ideation commonly, often, enough that I can say I have this tremendous, deep faith in God, and I know that I'm beloved, and I still sometimes struggle with this. When I'm, really doing bad, this is something that happens in my head. It's, and so my husband had the same reaction, several years ago. I told him, this is what I'm struggling with, and I need you to, he has hunting rifles. I need you to put them in the gun. I mean, they are in the gun safe already, but I need to not ever know where those keys are. And he was like, are you kidding me? That is the most, we have 3, and his first reaction was this guttural, anger. How could you be so selfish? Why would you even think that? Right. Because he's thinking, I'm thinking from my rational mind that I'm just gonna, what, and he's scared. And he, and so that was his first reaction. And I said, honey, like, I'm telling you this because I want to be here.
Yeah.
And also I'm struggling that I don't want to be here, or that I can't be here anymore. And so for him to come to terms with that, he is the polar opposite of me. He's never sick ever. He's very strong. He's very capable of, just pushing through. He's very, bootstrappy. Like, I've got strep throat. Well, you just, it's like,
drink some water.
Right.
Yeah.
He never goes to the doctor. Never, he had surgery on his hand, like full surgery, anesthesia, was at work the next day with it just wrapped in, like the doctor's like prescribing like hardcore pain meds. I'm like, just don't even bother. There's no way he's going to take those.
Yeah.
Like he's just going to do what he's going to do. And so he's the total, he's been married to this person who's incredibly weak, who's sick all the time, that's not what he signed up for when he thought, when we met in Hawaii and he was a surfer and I was, that's not what we thought our life was going to be. And this is what our life has become. And so the things that we are learning from each other, for him to get to the point where he could understand and empathize with the kind of pain that I was in and with, the things that I was thinking and struggling with, and be a support instead of, somebody who was, that's so selfish, right? Because in his mind, he can't relate to that either. He doesn't, have that. And so I think in the church, when we talk about things like that, there is the tendency, if we haven't been near it or touched by it, to have those reactions. And the problem with that, besides just the obvious problem, is that there are tons of people that are dealing with it, that are touched by it, that you would never know are dealing with it and are touched by it. And when I started finally writing about bipolar disorder and using it, that term, and talking about it openly, I talk about anxiety, I talk about, bipolar disorder, I talk about depression, starting to talk more about hypomania. People would come up and I would get all of these, for every comment I get, I probably get 10, 20 emails or private messages. So all this stuff is happening behind the scenes. Like it's a very private ministry in a way, because there are so many people that they can't say that they have bipolar disorder because they work in the education system or they're a teacher, or they can't say it because they're in the church and it's precarious to all their judgments after that will be in question. All their authority will be in question because they're this person that, can't be, their moods can't be trusted. Right. Or they're, so whatever these things are, these positions that they're in, they don't feel safe to be able to talk about it openly. And so when they are struggling and when they are hurting in the church, there is no place, to really have community in that way and to feel understood. And so I remember thinking, I don't know anybody, I think I knew one person that had bipolar disorder. And I was like, they were kind of, just and not removed from me, not even somebody really close. And then when I finally started talking about it, I realized there's tons of people that have bipolar disorder that I would never have even, people that I already knew that had it, that I didn't even know had it. And so I think that with mental illness, there's a lot of that. There's a lot that's happening under the surface and in secret. And I think church a lot of times, and not always, but a lot of times does not feel safe at all for people who are struggling with mental illness, because people don't understand the idea of that much brokenness in a person not being a sin.
I think too, like the church, I think they're getting better.
Yeah.
We can say that.
Yeah.
But I think the reason probably people feel so unsafe is because for so many people, they would say, well, you just need to trust God more.
Right. Yeah.
Or are you even a Christian?
Right.
If you were, then you wouldn't have these thoughts.
Right.
These are of the devil.
Yeah.
What do you say to those people?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are people that have done this work better than me. There are books that are, that are better resourced as far as this kind of stuff. Obviously, I'm not a mental health professional, but in terms of being a layman, somebody that has, struggled through this, I don't think that people understand the difference between an actual biological chemical imbalance that causes disruptive, and harmful thoughts and moods. And I mean, when I'm severely depressed, my affect even changes. Like my rate of speech slows down and like everything is just sludgy, I write about feeling like my synapses are, sort of insulated in cotton wool. Like there's just, it's just things aren't coming through the way that they're supposed to. So there's a very physical aspect to depression as well, and anxiety and hypomania. Like these are all things, schizophrenia. Like there's a very chemical thing that is happening. And I think what we think of sometimes, because there are terminologies, like, so people will say like, oh, I'm having anxiety, right? Or to be anxious for nothing, right? That's scriptural. And what they're not realizing is that there's a difference between, generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder and worry. Right. And
exactly.
But what we're not, or there's a difference between being sad, right? And being chemically depressed.
Right.
And so because we don't necessarily have language that differentiates between that, and because we're not comfortable with being uncomfortable in America, we just aren't. I mean, that's the reality for across the board. Anything that's uncomfortable, we typically shy away from it if we have the option. When we don't talk about those things because they don't make sense to us, or they're not something that we experience, which I think is common for a lot of things, we tend to want to give a platitude and a verse and tell people to be stronger.
Yeah.
We really want to tell people to be stronger when it's something that we're not struggling with.
Yeah. I think too, like, even when we think about this, proximity matters a lot. And if you said, when you first were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you felt like, I know no one else. There's nobody else. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, there are more people.
Right.
And I think also that goes for lots of areas of our life, socioeconomic, diversity, race, all kinds of things. Not knowing someone who would struggle with this would make your ideas about it completely different than having this personal experience. I want to tell you something. I've never said this publicly. Here we go. If I released the book last year, I've told them, everyone at my publishing house, if they ever do a reprint, which I don't even know how that happens, there's something I want to change. I did something inadvertently that I wish I wouldn't have done. Okay. Here's my vulnerability here. I have a chapter in my book called Sin Shock. And the premise is, when people come with you with their sins, with their struggles, as Christians, we need to not be shocked.
Right.
Like, we live in a broken world.
Yeah.
When you come to me and say, oh my gosh, I overreacted and hit my kid on the back when I should have, whatever.
Right.
I don't need to be like, oh my gosh, you're the worst person I've ever met in my entire life. That's the premise, right?
Right.
So in the book, I tell a story, and the chapter's called Sin Shock. And I tell a story about a girlfriend of mine not wanting to tell people at her church that she's struggling with depression. Because her husband's going through the process of becoming a deacon or something.
Right.
And I'll never forget that conversation with her, because I was broken.
Right.
That she felt so alone.
Yeah.
And so I tell that story with, we need to be able to tell people about what we're walking through.
Right.
Well, I don't think depression's a sin.
Right.
But by putting that story in the context of that chapter, I've only had a few people reach out, and I will answer every question.
Right.
But I wish I could change that, because I was not clear about that in my heart.
Yeah.
But I think, although I do not think depression's a sin, I do think that is a struggle for some people in the church to differentiate what you just said.
Right.
And the only way it's going to change is by people like you having the conversation with me, and then people understanding and meeting people who are walking through mental health issues.
Right.
So thank you for talking about it.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me confess my weird chapter that I wish I could.
There's stuff I already wish I could change, and my book came out a week ago. So
I hate it that people would think my heart was off on that. Okay, friends, I'm going to interrupt the conversation to thank two more of our sponsors for the show today. The first one I want to thank is Bolster Sleep Company. Here's the question I want to ask you. Are you exhausted every single day? There are endless demands, shuttling kids around, working, and trying to get all of the things done. It seems like you can never catch up on rest, but Bolster Sleep Company wants to change that. Can you imagine the impact you could have if you woke up thinking, what can I accomplish today? Instead of, when can I go back to bed? I have a Bolster sleep mattress in my house. We love the mattress. It is so comfortable. It is the exact right amount of firmness that you need. It keeps you cool. We highly, highly, highly recommend it. One of our favorite things that we like about Bolster is not only is it a very comfortable mattress, and we recommend it and we have one in our own home, but it's different in the way that they use their business to fulfill their mission. They partner with a technical school in Haiti, giving scholarships for things like plumbing and diesel mechanic training. And Bolster Sleep is so confident that they give you 100 days to try it in your home, risk-free. Check them out at bolstersleep.com and use the promo code HAPPYHOUR for 10% off. That's BOLSTER sleep.com. Start living life more fully at bolstersleep.com. Use promo code HAPPYHOUR for 10% off today. The second sponsor I want to thank is stamps.com. No one really actually has time to go to the post office. We're all so busy. That's why you need stamps.com. Stamps.com brings all the amazing services of the U.S. Post Office right to your computer. Whether you're a small office sending invoices, an online seller shipping out products, or even a warehouse sending thousands of packages a day, Stamps.com can handle it all with ease. Simply use your computer to print official U.S. postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send it. Then, once your mail is ready, just hand it to your mail carrier or drop it in a mailbox. With Stamps.com, you get 5 cents off every first-class stamp and up to 40% off priority mail. Not to mention, it's a fraction of the cost of those expensive postage meters. Right now, the listeners of the Happy Hour are going to get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Happy Hour. That's Stamps.com, enter Happy Hour. Okay, here is the rest of my conversation with Alia. This whole book that you talk about is glorious weakness and finding God in the weakness and finding God in that. And I started off the show by reading a part about what you said about maybe this is my spiritual gifting. What has being weak, we're all weak, but I'll use your words. What has your weakness, how has it, a couple things, why do you love God more because of it? And how has it affected your parenting, your marriage?
Yeah. So I went to that conference to speak and I thought I was going to be like very well prepared. And then I was horrendously sick for months ahead of time. Didn't even think I was going to make it there. And then like, I think 2 weeks before I got better and I was like, I guess I'm going. Like it was like, but I wasn't very prepared. I mean, it just was. And I remember going there and the night before feeling like God, I had the outline, but I felt like God wanted me to take it in a little bit of a different direction. And so I rewrote everything and it was like the middle of the night, but I was on steroids for my lungs. So I was already up.
Yeah.
And then in the morning I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to breathe. And I got up there to speak and I remember, I was preaching and I was preaching from a place that wasn't done. And there was something about it that was just really powerful. And I'm not typically the type of person that like, my speaking was really powerful, but I could feel the Holy Spirit moving because he needed to like be there because I didn't have anything. And I think what I've realized in my life is that there are so many people in pain, so many people wondering, is God good? Does he love me? If he does love me and if he is good, then why? Yeah. Why can I not get pregnant? Why have I lost this child? Why am I still single? Why did my job not turn out? Why won't these medications work? Why did I just get diagnosed with this? Why am I back in this cycle? Right? And so much of our life is in this middle space of, yes, we believe and kingdom come and Jesus is Lord. And also like, we're so broken. And saying that Jesus is Lord doesn't necessarily tidy everything up, right? Like the idea in church a lot of times, we talk about giving our testimony, and if you're in Christian culture at all, the youth group, right? You practice like your 5 to 10 minute testimony, and you start with like, I used to do this,
pre-Jesus,
and then like, and now I do this because I'm a Christian, and a lot of it is about how faithful we are, and to like change, whatever, instead of how faithful God is to us.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's really all of our testimony is never like how we're faithful. It's always how God's faithful to us. And I remember thinking about the opportunity for people to enter into other people's pain when there's honesty there, when there's vulnerability there. We connect on a different level when we're able to express honestly the things that we are feeling and struggling with and going through, not just with other people, but with God. Even in my book, I talk about there was a long period of time where I wouldn't even admit to God that I was, like my prayers were like, well, I'm supposed to pray this way to God. Yeah. Everything's going to work out. I trust you, instead of being like, I don't trust you. I want to believe, but help my unbelief, right? I believe, I'm claiming that, but oh Lord, I doubt, right? And we don't have space for that. We don't have space for a lot of those conversations. And so what we have are very pat answers. We have a lot of just things that we say that we slap onto all the hard things, and not necessarily people that walk through that. And what I found through my weakness is that the fact that there are a lot of people hurting, and that I get that was part of it. I get so many emails from people that are hurting, and they're private. Mm-hmm. They're always private.
Yeah.
It's never the person in the comments. I mean, even since the book came out, like, part of the thing is, I'm just like, I can't respond to all of there are just, as people are reading it, there's things that are coming out, and I get so many emails that I've never told anybody this.
Yeah.
Right. And you're holding these people's stories, and you're trying to steward this space. And what I'm saying is, God broke all of this open as an invitation, right? There's an invitation to be honest and to connect and to see God in a reality where we can talk to him like we know him. We can talk to him like he's our friend. And for years, I didn't know that I could do that, and so to be able to come to God and say, Lord, I'm hurting, or come to God angry and have, the prayers, like, we look at the Psalms and I think, gosh, if I wrote a blog post that was like some of these Psalms, people would be checking on me, right? They'd be like, oh, I don't know if you should put all that out there, right? Because we're not comfortable with it. Because the Psalms are a long time ago, and we know how that ends, right?
We know the ending.
Right? So we're like, okay, but those weren't written. A lot of them are not written with an ending, right? They're written with just sitting in that lament, sitting in that pain. And we just are not good at it. We're just not. And so I think that weakness is an opportunity to have no other options. We don't, I talk a lot about being poor in spirit. What does that mean? And there's a very real, aspect of poverty that I've lived with in my life. And so there is this idea of, you just don't have any choices. Like, there are no choices. And when we are in that sort of desperate space with God, we see him move in a way that we don't see when we have our options, when we have our things that we can rely on. And I don't think most of us, if we have the option, put ourselves in, purposely displace ourselves from comfort and safety. And we, none of us do that. If we don't have to, we don't do it, because we like the freedom that we have in choice. We like the power we have in safety. We like all of the things that keep us feeling like, comfortable, and feeling like we don't really have to rely on God too much, like a little bit, right? Because we want him involved in our life, but not if he takes away, right? And how do we live with a God? How do we say, "Blessed is the name of the Lord," when he takes away? When that's what our life looks like. And for so many people, that is what they're struggling with. These cycles of, Lord, why did you take this from me? And are you enough to fill what's empty? And the truth is, he is.
For sure. But
you don't always know that until you've been there, until you really press in and you realize, oh my gosh, like, he is enough. He's worth it. He's worth it. And, people might look at some of the circumstances in my life and think, are you sure?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Are you sure? And, I can say more in the last 5-10 years, I'm absolutely sure.
It's beautiful. And I think so many times when we are vulnerable with our stories and we're willing to kind of go first, what you're seeing happen is what happens. People come out of the woodworks going, wow, I get this. Me too. I've been through this. And you've always written from a very vulnerable place and, online. Do you remember the first time you shared something super, super vulnerable?
I don't remember the first time because I think I started writing in a pretty... I started my blog. It was going to be like a sewing DIY homeschooling blog, right? So when
sewing at homeschool?
Yes.
I love it.
It was going to be all that.
Okay.
And then I realized I hate talking about it. I don't like to take pictures of the steps. But I had this blog and so then I was like, well, what do I, do with this blog? And I'd always liked writing privately, in my journal and things like that, but I'd never written publicly. And then shortly after I had my blog set up, I started going through a this was the depression that actually led to my diagnosis of bipolar. I was severely depressed for about 4 months and not functioning. I mean, on almost any level. And, but I would write these blog posts and so I don't remember like a distinct, like, oh, this, because I think I was I was in so much pain and I was so numb and sad and all of the things with depression that I don't know that I really registered what I was putting out into the world at the time. Like, I think there's a part of me that if I had thought it all through, I probably would have been like, maybe not say maybe this, not that. You know? Yeah. But I think that at the time, the place that I was, and also I just started blogging. So it's not like, you know, it's like my mom is going to know, you know, and she lives with me and knows anyway, you know? So I didn't think that I had a very big audience of people listening anyway. So it felt a little bit more
easier.
Yeah.
I think that is a good place that you started there. You know, you're like, hey, I'm going to get my feet wet with 3 people reading my blog and stuff.
Yeah.
As we're thinking about mental illness, and I keep thinking about this, is what is your, maybe not advice or encouragement, but like, let's put me in a situation. And let's say I have a girlfriend who I don't understand what she's walking through. There are times I think, I don't just get up. Like, I don't know why we're still in bed. Like, what are we doing?
Right.
But I don't want to think that.
Right.
But I don't understand.
Right.
How do I, or anybody that's listening, how do we be the friend to that person that person needs?
Yeah. I remember having a conversation once with a friend of mine, and she's great. She's awesome. But she has a relative that was dealing with depression. And I remember she had said some things that were along the lines of like, we, you know, went out of our way to see this person and they couldn't get out, even like, they couldn't even bother to like entertain it, you know, or be there, be as present as they needed them to be. And it was kind of this hassle and sort of this idea of like, we came all the way out here. Why are you not just getting out of bed? Why don't you just go for a walk? Why don't you just do all these things? And I remember talking to her and saying, you know, reframe it as something that we have compassion for automatically. And there are things in society that we have compassion for. We have compassion for cancer patients. If you went to your friend's or relative's house and they had cancer and they couldn't get out of bed, you would probably be a pretty terrible person. You're like, oh my gosh, we drove all the way here and this cancer patient can't get out of bed, right? To do all of these things for us. Because there's a compassion built into that experience. There are certain illnesses that we have compassion for, and there are certain that we don't, right? The ones that we think we brought on ourselves, we don't have compassion for that. And depression is one of those that we think people have brought on themselves by not choosing joy, by not being grateful enough, by not seeing all that they have, by not having a strong enough prayer life, by not having enough faith. You know, all of those things surround our idea of what causes depression, right? And they're not making the right choices, and therefore they are in bed. And if they would just get up, and, you know, we know sunshine helps. If they would just go outside, we know that being with people, you know, all of these things that we think, well, if you just did this, then, right? And so we don't have compassion for people that are hurting in that space. And so I think sometimes to reframe it in our minds, would I say the same thing or feel the same thing if this person had something that I am compassionate about, right? That I do care about? What kind of friend would I be to that person? So if you go to your friend's house and she had cancer, what would you do? You probably bring food so she doesn't have to get out of bed. You might bring flowers so that she has something to look at while she's there. You might bring her magazines that she loves to read. There would just be other things. You would check on her. You would make sure that her laundry is done, or, you know, whatever. And I always say, like, for deep friends, depression tends to not for everybody. And, you know, you always hope that it's like a one and done. And, you know, somebody goes through a season of depression, they come out and they don't ever struggle with it again. Like, that's always the hope. But for a lot of people, it's chronic and it happens and it will cycle and they will go through depressions again. So one of my advice to people is, if you have a close friend that does struggle with anxiety or mental illness or those kind of things that are more likely to be chronic, ask them in a time of health, what I hope you never struggle with this again, but if you do, how can I best love you? Like, tell me the things that I could do. So I have a plan in place when I see you starting to struggle, when I see you, unable to do these things or just, what can I do
That's good.
that is personal to you? I remember one time, I'm a super hardcore introvert. And so sometimes people will be like, I'll bring you a meal. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, I don't want to sit
in my
with you
head,
if
I'm like, the thought of getting out of bed, putting on, clothes that I can answer my door in, answering my door, listening to somebody say all the things that they're going to say, talking about how to reheat the oven and put the thing, I just like the thought of it is so exhausting to me that I'm like, I'd rather just starve. I mean, really, like, I will just starve.
Yes.
And I like food a lot. So, that's saying something. So I'm like, I remember thinking like, I need a checklist. Like, what Enneagram type are you? What are you going to expect from me? How much time do we, because I feel like I am using every ounce of energy to survive right now, to stay alive. It's all going to just keeping me alive, and I can't make small talk. And I even with like people that I love, and even with people that, it costs too much energy.
Yeah.
And so I remember one time I was in, I don't even remember what it was. It was years ago, but one of the women knew that I was going through a really severe depression, and she started a meal train, but they put a giant igloo cooler on my front porch, and they brought meals and put them in there. And then when my husband got home, he would take them out and put them in the freezer or whatever. And I didn't have to see anybody or deal with anybody, but it was a tangible way for them to say, we see you, and we're validating that this is a real thing that you're struggling with. Right? Because for people that are sick, we do that, and it meant so much to me that not only would they love me, but they would love me in a way that was specific to what I needed at that time.
Yeah. It almost reminds me of the AIDS crisis in the 80s. How everyone was like, we don't know what to do with this. Right. And how it has thankfully progressed into people having the same compassion for someone with HIV as they would with someone with diabetes or cancer. But at that time, it was just like, no compassion. Right. Because we don't get this.
Yeah.
I want to ask you another question before we finish. And that is, you have 3 kids. And so this journey, this glorious weakness that you see yourself walking through, that you see God so abundant through your weakness. What has that been like at the same time parenting 3 people? Because I always say that parenting is by far the hardest job I'll ever get through. Like, if all these people make it out of here, then we have, like, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's hard work on so many levels, physical, emotional, spiritually. How has that been for you as someone who is saying, I'm going to acknowledge my weakness, which we all do, but in the context of what you're writing about here, how has that affected your parenting?
Well, there's that's like a whole nother book, but yeah.
I see book number 2 right here, Alia. Here we go.
That's another book. I wasn't diagnosed until I was early 30s. So my oldest, who's 18, had the brunt of instability.
Okay.
And he grew up with a mom who was, in my 20s, extremely legalistic, like very, very strict. First time obedience. If I say something, I don't ever want to have to repeat myself. He was very, very obedient, very well behaved, but
typical first child almost.
Right. Yeah. All of the and I was in a more hypomanic phase for extended periods.
Can you just explain hypomanic real quick?
Yeah. So the depression is obviously what we know, the low end, right? Where we're super depressed. Hypomanic phase typically is the upswing of bipolar depression. So I have bipolar 2, which means I have hypomania instead of just straight manic.
Okay.
Although I have characteristics of both. So mania typically is more extreme. Bipolar 1 is more extreme in that they can have, visions and psychotic like breaks and episodes that are have other features, additional features. Hypomanic. So when I'm hypomanic, I can survive on 2 hours sleep.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I have all of the ideas in the whole world. I have sort of grandiose confidence that I can do all the totally not my normal. But I'm like, I will start a blog. I will learn Latin. I will repaint all my furniture in my whole house. Yeah. Right. And things that you could almost. I mean, this is part of the thing. I almost thought that's just my normal self, and then this is my depressed self. irrational spending, where you're like, I have to buy all the cleaning products at Walmart at 2 a.m, right? And then I'm walking through the thing with all these organic, $200 in organic cleaning products that we do not have the money for,
Yeah.
And my husband's like, what is happening? Like, what is going on? Or I would get these, things. So very fixated on certain things, scrambled thoughts. The worst part of it is a lot of agitation and frustration because nobody's keeping up with you.
And so this is your parent. This is where you are when you're parenting your oldest.
So a lot of anger, tons of yelling, which I'm a very, very calm, chill mom now, which is interesting. But that part of it, he got the most of that. So his discipleship sort of process of parenting him has been interesting because he has had 2 very different theologies about who God is. And the first one is, we are pleasing to God because we homeschool and we watch the right things and we do the right things and we say the right things and you are first time obedient and we are all very obedient, outside, right? All the outside of the cup is super clean, shiny. Inside just death.
Like God loves us because of how we act.
Yes. And I would say grace is in there. But
sure.
Grace was the thing that got you saved. And now we work really hard to please God, right? We're not pleasing to God on our own. We have to do all of these things and perform. No idea of what it means to be beloved by God. No idea of what grace actually, how absurd God's grace is. There's just none. And so I think he grew up with a lot of that in the beginning. And then I started to break down. I started to fall apart. I started to get sick. I started to have more, and all of a sudden this facade of competence.
You couldn't keep it up.
I couldn't keep it up. And it was devastating to me because I had always been able to do the things and now I couldn't do the things. And it was humiliating because I was one of those people in my 20s that was like, I remember taking a spiritual gifts test once and I had if I could have a negative number on mercy, it would have been negative 20, but it was 0, none, no mercy at all judgment. If they are in that thing, that's their, they made the choices and they're not following God. And, you've obviously, and just no compassion for, or empathy for people. But a lot of truth, lots of exhortation. And so for me, when I had that shift with my oldest and started to break down and started to really be met by the grace of God, my parenting radically shift. So with my second 2, they have experienced a God that adores them and that loves us in our weakness and that meets us in the places that we're broken and that is just well pleased with us. He just loves us, right? And so they have experienced that and a lot more tenderness in parenting. And my son too, but it was just this.
It was later.
Dynamic shift, right? Mom is this, and now mom is this, and now God was this, and now God is this. And so I do think that he sometimes is still struggling between those. I think it's probably a harder shift for him in terms of that. But I also think my kids, it's hard to parent kids when you're not well. And there are impacts from me being sick that I know affect them. There are things that I can't do in my lack. There are places that are things that don't get done, things that are not fulfilled. And there has to be a trust in God and his grace that he is enough, not just for me, but for them. And I think that it's, I've struggled with mom guilt of at my worst depressions, I think they would all be better off without me because I'm going to go through this again and I'm going to struggle again. And the voice in my head says, you can just end it and you'll go off somewhere and you won't leave anything to clean up. It'll be really tidy and they'll just move on. In my mind, when I'm sick, this is what I'm doing something better for them. They will have a better mom than me, and not realizing God gave them me and he's equipped to meet them in the places that I can't. And that is actually a great experience for them to realize that no one is going to meet them the way that God can. No one, and so there are places that I know I am not meeting my children's needs in all of the ways that I wish that I could. And that's not an excuse. Obviously I'm trying, but I'm human and I will fail. And that's okay. It's okay for them to see me fail. It's okay for them to see me have to ask for forgiveness when I get it wrong. It's okay for them to know that grace covers everything that we do. I want them to know that that I adore them and that I love them and that, I'll always ask for forgiveness if I'm wrong, that we can be humble enough to admit we don't all have it together. In my 20s, I was the mom that you did not question because I am the authority and I know everything and I've read a parenting book, right? All the parenting books.
Yes.
And then in my 30s and, now I'm 40, I've realized mom gets it wrong and it's okay for all of us to come to grace, like to know that this is a reality. Like we actually need this, right?
Yeah.
And that God loves us in it and he meets us in it.
I think it's so beautiful. We're talking about a parent-child relationship here, but what I'm thinking when you're saying this is it is so true that in all of our relationships, we cannot be everything to everybody.
Right. Yeah.
And we can't because we're broken and because we're sinful.
Yeah.
And there is always that missing link, and it is where God can step in. And so that is an encouragement to us moms that are listening. But you don't have to be a mom to understand that.
Right.
That is a humanity thing, is that we don't have the capacity to meet everyone's needs. Yeah. Alia, I cannot thank you enough for this
thanks
book.
for having me.
I'm excited. And although I haven't read it all, I will finish this book. And that means a lot because I get a lot of books in the mail. I always ask people, what are they loving and what are they reading? So what are you loving and what are you reading?
I totally forgot what I said. I love my Voxer app.
You did say that.
Okay. Because it keeps me in touch with all of my writer friends, especially with book launch and everything going on. And through the whole writing process, like, you're writing in isolation.
Oh, it's so isolating.
And it's exhausting. And you think like, is this even good? And so, I'd be up at 5 a.m. and I would use my Voxer app and, oh my gosh, everything I wrote is horrible, you know, and they would like talk me down and celebrate with me. And so that has, I don't even know how I would, have finished the book. I actually have that in my acknowledgements. Voxer app. I'm like, if I couldn't have done it without you. What else do I love? On Twitter, I had asked one time, what food most reminds you of your childhood or something like that. And I got all these answers and it was really interesting because some were obviously
question.
Like good answer, like, oh, my grandma used to make, and then others were like, ketchup sandwiches because that's all we could afford, or and so it's so interesting, like the different dynamics to what food most reminds you of your childhood, right? Something like that. And this one woman, another Asian lady, said she has like rice, and I think she used tuna, but like this Japanese mayonnaise and sriracha and furikake, which is like seaweed sprinkle. And anyway, she described this like snack that she used to have, and I was like, oh, that sounds delicious. So my little guy, I call him little, he's 10. He's your little one. He's my little guy. He's super picky and he eats, but he doesn't eat like a lot of normal kid foods. Like he's picky, but in a weird sort of way. And so finding stuff that like I can feed him. My older two, I was, like, ew, this is what it is and just eat it.
Yeah.
But he had some health things. And so with his blood sugars, we had to get him to eat all the time. And so we just kind of, the doctor's like, just give him whatever he will eat, And so now he does not have that issue anymore. He's grown out of it. But, he's totally spoiled. And he's the last one. And grandma lives with us, right? So, but anyway, so that snack is like, it's really kind of a mini meal, but that's something that I love.
Very delicious.
It is so good and it's easy.
Did you say Japanese mayonnaise?
Yeah, so it's Kewpie, like Kewpie.
I'm a mayonnaise lover.
You can get it at Asian markets, and it comes in like a squirt tube with like a little baby on.
Okay,
I don't know.
I'm down for that.
But yeah, if you mix it with like sriracha, it's like you just can eat it with all the stuff. It's really good.
Are you reading and loving anything these days?
Yeah, so I was in Portland the other day with my daughter. She travels with me sometimes when she can. And we went to Powell's because she has book money. Like she's...
And you just should when you're there.
Yeah, right. And so I didn't have book money, but she had book money. But then I got there and they had Dorothy Day. I don't know. She... what is the Reckless Way of Love, I think. Okay. And I had read I'd read The Long Loneliness before, and I love her, and I love some of the quotes that she had. So my daughter bought me that.
That was nice of her to use her book money.
It was. She bought herself a lot of stuff too, but she did buy me a couple of books. So it kind of goes around because, next time I'll get her. But that one and Brian Doyle. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was a writer that worked for... and he lived in Portland. Okay. And he's passed away now a couple years ago, but it's the Book of Uncommon Prayer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And
Nice.
he does prayers on like baseball and ballet. I mean, like just random, but he's such a good writer. I just love his.
You can read anything he puts out.
Yeah, pretty much. So I got that. And then Placemaker, Chrissy Purifoy.
Yes.
I have not gotten like far at all because, again, I'm.
Life.
Yeah. And then the Atlas of Red and Blues or Blues and Red.
Okay, I don't know.
It's a fiction book about a woman who is shot by police officers and some of that. So I just started that. And I haven't gotten far, but I like it so far.
Okay. Are you a multiple book person?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. One fiction book. I only read one fiction at a time.
Because your story, you get lost. Yeah.
But, and I'm I'm a book quitter. So if I get into like.
You'll give up?
Oh, for sure.
I won't quit.
I always quit.
I have to go all the way.
Life's too short.
That's a good rule right there. Alia, thank you so much.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for encouraging women. Honored to sit down with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed the show. I think that my hope in this kind of conversation is awareness. I'm so proud of Alia for her courage, her vulnerability, and her confidence in who God made her to be. With her stories that she shared today, in the book that she wrote, I just hope that you've learned as much as I have. And so thank you, Alia, for talking with us and champion just the awareness of mental health. So thank you, guys. Thank you for listening. Today's show is edited by Chris with Podshaper, and the music was developed for the show by Matt Graham. Show notes are written by Aki Slackers, and this whole thing is organized by Lindsay Sweeney. Next week, my guest is Pam Tebow. Yes, Tim Tebow's mom. Pam was in the house. She sat down in the studio a couple months with me. We chatted it up, and just the cutest thing ever is that she calls Tim Tebow Timmy. Like, she literally calls him Timmy the whole time. I love it. Pam's going to talk a lot about just being confident in your motherhood journey, and she's got some amazing stories. She's going to talk about how scary, it was just so scary, her pregnancy with Tim, and how God moved through that. It was a fun conversation. So come back next week, the first week of June. Pam Tebow will be here. Guys, enjoy your week. Share the show with a girlfriend. Have a happy hour with a friend. We're toasting to the end of school year. We made it, mamas. We made it, kids. We can do this. I'll see you guys next week with Pam Tebow.